In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the 21-22 NBA rookies, look at their card prices up till this point, and kind of reflect on where they're at, see, you know, who seems to be maybe kind of undervalued in comparison to others, who seems to be maybe a bit more hyped up and might be a better card to try to sell at this point. And I think this is a good time to do this kind of reflection as it's approaching the, you know, as the NBA offseason is coming up, and, you know, you're probably going to see some dips. So it's kind of good to see where things are currently at. Now, I should mention this doesn't necessarily mean I think that the ones who are undervalued are great buys right now. I think it's probably better to wait closer to the offseason or closer to the end of the offseason. Or the middle of the offseason, and to also see like what's happening with the sports card market in general, because as we know, you know, it's been continuing to go down a bit over time in an overall sense. So it might be good to not necessarily go out and buy the rookies who are cheaper in comparison to others, but it's kind of still good to see, you know, where are things at, how are people seeing each of these rookies as far as their card values are concerned, because there may be some opportunities. You know, there's certain players whose cards value may be quite low, and they might have a spike. They might be really set up to have a spike right as the NBA season starts. There might be other players who've just gone up so incredibly already, and we will see a couple of those. And I think this is useful timing as well, because it's before the main products, the prisms, the optics, all these kinds of things have been released yet, so we can get a sense of this before the flagship stuff has been released. So I think this is a useful time to reflect on this as well. All right, so let's get into this. All right, so the way we're gonna do this, we're gonna look at the card values of the lottery picks, as well as a handful of kind of standout rookies from their rookie season. They're outside of the lottery, and kind of compare, look at the comps, the recent comps on 3 cards for each of them. We'll look at the Hoops Silver, which is numbered out of 199, see what that price is valued at for each of these players. We'll look at the Donruss rated rookie Orange Laser. Now, not because the Orange Laser is something special, but because there's quite a few sales on it, and it's more valuable than the base rookie card. A little bit more sought than that, but still there's enough sales where we can get a good sense of how much it's actually going for, without needing to just look at, you know, with the Hoop Silver, occasionally it'll be like one comp or something. You know, we want to have something that really gives us a sense. And then the third one will be the Origins base rookie, which is, you know, a higher end base rookie. Of all the products released at the time I'm making this video, is probably the highest end of all the base rookies. So we'll look at those 3 and just kind of get a sense. You know, we're not gonna sometimes at this early stage there's not a lot of consistency necessarily, you know, and sometimes the Hoop Silver is going, you know, double or triple the price of some of these other cards, and sometimes the Origins rookie is going for more than the Hoop Silver. So it's really inconsistent at this point, but it's still, I think this will give us a bit of a sense for where things are at, or where people's heads are at with each of these rookies. Now with the comps, I'm going to use, in order to determine the comp value I put on here, I'm going to take the 3 most recent sales and average them out. If there's something that's a real outlier, I'll just knock that one off. But if it's a slight outlier, I will be including that one. I'm going to try to do the 3 most recent. If it's a sale that there hasn't been a lot of recent comps, I'm not going any further back than beginning of March, which already is kind of far away. But, you know, I'm trying to keep it in April. If I have to go back to March, I'll go back to March, but I won't go back to February at all. If I do make a comp that's February, I'll mention it. If there's like no sales at all of some card in March and April, I don't think that happens. I can't remember. But if there is, I'll mention that one. So this, again, just to get a sense, not to say this is what this card's worth, just to get a sense. Also, I'm going to be specifically looking at raw, because these cards are so early releases. There's very few that have been graded, so that's another thing to mention. All right, so first let's take a look at who are the players that we're going to be looking at. Again, it's all the lottery picks plus a couple of extras. So let's just go through the list here. We're going to be looking at Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green, Evan Mobley, Scottie Barnes, Jalen Suggs, Josh Giddey, Jonathan Kuminga, Franz Wagner, Davion Mitchell, Ziaire Williams, James Bouknight, Joshua Primo, Chris Duarte, Moses Moody, Corey Kispert, Alperen Sengun, Tre Mann, Bones Hyland, Cameron Thomas, Herbert Jones, and Ayo Dosunmu. First, we're gonna look at the 38th pick in the draft, Ayo Dosunmu. His Hoop Silver out of 199 is currently going for about $40. His Donruss Orange Laser is going for about $9, and his Origins base is going for about $14. And just to look quickly at his stats, he's got 8.8 points per game, 3.3 assists per game, 2.8 rebounds per game, 59.6% field goal percentage. That's really good. To 37.6% three-point percentage. He's been playing about 27.4 minutes per game, which for rookie year for a second round pick, the Bulls pulled really good on this one. So, you know, when we look at all these numbers, I'll put up a bunch of these numbers on the screen at one time so you can kind of see them in comparison as I talk. So for Ayo Dosunmu, you know, his cards are already, you know, pretty highly valued in comparison to most of the others on this list. I think, you know, for good reason. I mean, he's been doing really well. However, I would suggest that a lot of it has been because of the unexpected nature of his excellence. I mean, he's doing so well, and he was the 38th pick. That's so rare. So I think that's a big reason. I think he's going to be a great backup point guard for the Bulls. He could have a career where he ends up being a solid starting point guard in the future, but I don't necessarily see him as someone who's great investment. If I had his cards that were valued at like $40, $50 right now, I'd probably be selling it rather than holding on to it, because I think if anything, they've already had their spike. All right, next we're going to look at the 35th pick in the draft, Herbert Jones. I really like. His hoop silver is going for about $20. His orange laser from Donruss is going for about $5. And his Origins base, if I find it, I'll put it up here. When I did this research, I couldn't find it. So I'll just put that up here. So, and he was averaging 9.5 points per game, 3.8 rebounds per game, 1.7 steals per game. So that's, you know, he's a defensive monster. He's shooting 52.5% with 33.3% from 3-point, 29.9 minutes per game for a playoff team. So that's also pretty good. So this guy, another steal, maybe the steal of the draft, I would say, is Herbert Jones in number 35. His cards also, though, are kind of, I wouldn't say they're undervalued. You know, I think he's not under the radar. People recognize that he's had an excellent season. I mean, even ESPN talks about him, and Ayo Dosunmu as well. Like, these are two rookies that are talked about. So I think their card value has already risen. The fact that he's half the price of Ayo Dosunmu does make him see, oh, well, that's a possible person. But at the same time, the nature of his play doesn't necessarily seem to be the kind of thing that's going to be super sought in the hobby. He's very defensive minded, and he's great at it. He could be a glue guy for a really excellent team. So I think he'll have an amazing career. I don't necessarily see him as someone who's going to have a lot of love in the hobby long term, though. So I don't think I would be aiming for his cards myself. If I got him, I'd probably hold him, but I don't think I'd be aiming for them. All right, next up, we got number 27 pick, Cameron Thomas. His hoop silver is going for just $550. His Donruss orange laser is going for $250, and his Origins base card is going for $5. So he's been averaging 8.5 points per game in only 17.6 minutes, by the way, and 2.4 rebounds per game with pretty low shooting splits, 48% from the field, 27% from three. But I think he's quite undervalued, and he's under the radar a bit. I mean, he's on the Nets. They got a lot of guys who kind of conquer the spotlight, but he's been having an underrated rookie season. So I think he's somebody that's worth keeping an eye on. I wouldn't necessarily go heavy into buying a bunch of his cards or anything, but when I see them for sale, like a short printed card or short printed hoops or something like that, I have been looking for it to see what the possibilities are, because sometimes they're going so cheap right now. And 8.5 points per game when he's only been averaging 17 minutes is actually very excellent for a rookie. If he can improve the shooting percentage, take a bit better decisions here and there, I think he's got some potential. Low risk, low price, I should say, low price to get some of his cards. So I kind of think he's got a possibility to be somebody who breaks out at some point, possibly. And just before him was the number 26 pick, Bones Hyland. So his hoop silver is going for $1150. His Donruss orange laser is going for $850, and his Origins base is going for $13. So here's one of these where the Origins base is actually even going for more than a numbered card. He was averaging 10.1 points per game, 2.8 assists, 2.7 rebounds on decent shooting, 51.8% field goal, 36.6% 3-point in 19 minutes per game. So again, averaging double figures in just 19 minutes per game. That's pretty solid. I think, though, kind of similar to Herbert Jones and Ayo Dosunmu, he hasn't been under the radar too much. I think people recognize that he's been doing really well. Plus, he's got an awesome name, so it sticks in people's minds. So Bones Hyland, I think he's somebody to keep an eye on in the same way that I would keep an eye on Herbert Jones and Ayo Dosunmu. He's got the potential, as a point guard, somebody who's a little, who's fun to watch. I think he's got the potential to have a little bit more more of a spark in the hobby potentially. So I'm keeping my eyes on him if I can find good deals. And I think he's somebody who's, though he's not completely under the radar, I think he's under the radar enough that there are some good deals, you know, cards that will slip through the cracks. I don't think cards are slipping through the cracks with somebody like Ayo Dosunmu, for example. I think people recognize and seek for him. Herbert Jones might slip through the cracks a little bit, and Bones Hyland might slip through the cracks a little bit, so you might be able to find a good deal here and there. Okay, next up we have the 18th pick in the draft, Tre Mann. So his Hoop Silver's going for $550. His Donruss Orange Laser is going for $650, and his Origins Base Rookie is going for $550. And his stats, he was averaging 10.4 points per game, 2.9 rebounds per game, on 47.6% field goal and 36% three-point shooting splits, and 22.8 minutes per game. So pretty solid also. You know, I think they got a good deal here at the 18th pick in the draft. I think he could have easily gone in the lottery and nobody would blink an eye. You know, he's a good player. So I think he's a one to keep an eye on. I don't necessarily see him as somebody to become a breakout star. But you know, with the prices as low as they are on him, he is somebody who could have a burst at some point. You know, maybe early next season, because he did go under the radar. You know, I think not a lot of people were paying much attention to him. So I think he did go under the radar. So if he comes out and people are like surprised, oh, hey, he's pretty good, I could see an early spike. I wouldn't certainly see him as a long-term hold, but for a short-term spike, I see a lot of potential for him to be that kind of guy. Okay, number 16, Alperen Sengun, who his Hoops Silver's going for about $10. His Donruss Orange Laser, $550, and his Origins Base, $8. He's been averaging 9.6 points per game and 5.5 rebounds per game, as well as 2.6 assists on 50.2% field goal, about 20.7 minutes per game. So pretty solid. You know, I think he was one of the guys that I was surprised went this far back in the draft. I think a lot of people were. I guess, you know, there's an unknown quantity when it comes to some of these players, but he's been doing very well. I think he's had one of the understated rookie seasons compared to some of these other guys. He's been doing really well. That being said, you know, his cards are, you know, they're more expensive than Tre Mann. They're more expensive than Cameron Thomas. I'd probably rather aim for those guys from a hobby perspective, just because, you know, he's not the kind of player that I think is going to get a whole lot of hobby love. He's going to be a solid big man. He's going to be a solid player for a while, I think, but I don't see the hobby really ever grasping him too much. I could be wrong, but that's kind of how I'm seeing it at the moment. I do think he's underrated as far as just basketball is concerned. I think he's underrated. But I have a feeling he'll be underrated in the hobby forever. All right, number 15 pick in the draft was Corey Kispert. His Hoop Silver's going for $10. His Donruss Orange Laser is going for about $1, and his Origins Base Rookie's going for $3. So he averaged 8.2 points per game this season, 2.7 rebounds on 56.4% field goal, 35% from three in 23.4 minutes per game. Now, actually, Corey Kispert is one that I think is one to definitely keep an eye on, a closer eye on than anybody else I've mentioned. I think he's gone completely under the radar. His beginning half of his rookie season was underwhelming. His second half was really, really excellent. He's really built himself into a solid role there. And sometimes his cards really slip through the cracks. I mean, you can find some really short printed stuff that ends up going for really cheap because people are not seeking him out. But I actually think he has a lot of potential to be, you know, I guess you could call him a sleeper. You know, I think I don't think people realize that he's going to be a good player. He's not going to break out into being a superstar, but I think he's going to break out enough where people are like, whoa, why is this card worth $1? This should be $10. I have a feeling that'll happen with him. So I've been aiming for him more than some of these other guys. I've been aiming, I'm not trying to pump and dump here or anything, but I have been aiming, just expecting that at some point in the first half of next season that his cards would see a spike, and they're so low right now. You know, so, like I said, the Hoop Silver here is $10, which is closer to a similar range when it comes to some of these other cards. But that's a little bit higher than I've seen. You know, a lot of his other cards are going way lower than anybody else. You know, even players who don't have the talent that he has. And it took a little bit of a transition at the beginning, but he feels like he's been in the league forever, and I think he's gonna really find his niche in the league. And I think his cards will have to go up. I mean, that's what I'm banking on. Have to go up at least somewhat in the early part of next year, I think. All right, next up, the 14th pick in the draft was Moses Moody. So his Hoop Silver is going for $6.50. His Donruss Orange Laser is going for $3.50, and his Origins Base card is going for $6. So he's been averaging 4.4 points per game, 1.5 rebounds per game on 54.6% field goal, 36.4% 3-point on 11.7 minutes per game, which is the least amount of minutes per game of anybody we've looked at so far. And in fact, if I just scroll through my notes here, other than one other guy, I think he has the second least amount of minutes per game on this whole list we're looking at. Part of that is, of course, he's on the Golden State Warriors. He's on a championship contender team. It's not often somebody picked this high in the draft is on a championship contender team. So he's had a little bit of a tough time finding a role. He hasn't had the greatest rookie season, which can also be reflected in his low-ish card values. But at the same point, he's on a team that's in the spotlight, so people are paying attention to him. So his cards haven't gone down. I would say, despite the fact that a lot of the other players, maybe all the other players I've mentioned so far, have had better seasons than Moses Moody. Moses Moody's a little bit more in people's minds because being on the Golden State Warriors. So I think that's kept his values actually a little bit higher than I would expect them to be in comparison to others. So I'm not necessarily aiming at him because, I don't see the Golden State Warriors might be a good development team, but they're not aiming to develop their rookie. Kuminga, we'll get to him later. He's kind of a bit of an exception to that because he's shown so much talent. But Moody, I think he's going to take a little bit of time to get himself adjusted into the league, and I wouldn't be surprised if he gets traded or something like that as well. While he's at Golden State, I have a feeling he's kind of always going to be in the background, and I'm not aiming for his cards too much right now. If I had some, I'd probably even sell them. All right, number 13 pick in the draft from the University of Oregon. Woo! Chris Duarte. So his Hoop Silver is going for about $11. His Orange Laser is going for $4.50, and his Origins Base is going for $4. Now he had a great season. He was averaging 13.1 points per game this year, with 4.1 rebounds, 2.1 assists, and 1 steal to go along with 50.7% field goal and 36.9% from 3 in 28 minutes per game. So he came into the league as a veteran. Really, he's not a rookie. He came in and it took no transition. He is who he is. I don't think he's gonna ever become an excellent, amazing player, but I think he could be a starter for like a championship quality team, or he could be a glue guy for a championship team as long as they have other players who are more like superstar around him. I think he's an excellent player. I really like the pairing of him and Tyrese Halliburton. It's one of my favorite pairs to watch. And he's from the University of Oregon, so that's cool. I'm from Eugene, so that's why I gotta say that. It's obligation. So I think he's his cards are, he's not under the radar. He's not a like spark, like the kind of guy that's gonna get on highlight reels and stuff. I don't necessarily think he's gonna ever absolutely be the hobby's never gonna be in love with him. But at the same point, he's got a very high floor, I guess you could say. His ceiling might be not that high in comparison to others because we already kind of know what he's gonna be, but his floor is one of the highest. I think he's going to be an excellent player no matter what. So I think he's kind of a safe person to get, and in the hope that he might spike up a bit. But that being said, because he was drafted pretty early on, his cards already have a decent value. But when I look at it in comparison, like if I could choose between getting a Duarte or for 3 or 4 times the price, getting an Ayo Dosunmu, I'd rather get a Duarte. If I had to choose between getting a Chris Duarte and getting a Herbert Jones for double the price, or Bones Hyland for like a similar price, I'd still go Chris Duarte. I think he's or an Alperen Sengun is a similar price. I'd rather have Chris Duarte. So these are guys that are all in that kind of range. So Chris Duarte is somebody I think might be a little underappreciated at the moment. So I don't know if maybe at some point the hobby will be like, wait a second, we should appreciate this guy a little more. Not to go like this, but to be like, whoop, let's go a little higher and plateau here. That's probably what's going to happen at some point. He's really good. All right, number 12, we have Joshua Primo. So his Hoop Silver is going for $12.75, which is kind of surprising to me. His Donruss Orange Lasers for $2.50, and his Origins is $3.50. So he's averaging 5.8 points per game, 2.3 rebounds per game, 1.6 assists per game, 45.2% field goal percentage, 30.7% three-point percentage on 19.3 minutes per game for a really quite terrible Spurs team. So, actually, I'm surprised his cards are this high. He was one of those players that when he was drafted, people were surprised. Like, wait a second, like you got all these other guys you could choose from. Why are you going for this guy? Now, I think a lot of the Spurs really see him as somebody raw, so they might be seeing something that you know, us, the rest of us aren't seeing yet. It could be that there's some real high ceiling there, but with the high ceiling, I think there's also a pretty low floor. So I think there's a lot of risk involved with his cards. So I'm not aiming for them, especially considering that they're actually higher priced than I really would have expected them to be. I mean, when they're solidly more expensive than Chris Duarte, I'd much prefer Chris Duarte. I mean, anybody else who's at his similar kind of price range, I think Joshua Primo is one of the lowest on the list I'd probably be aiming for. If I did have some, I wouldn't necessarily be selling them right now, just because there is a high upside, you know, because of how raw he is. There's some potential there, and the Spurs are excellent at developing players. So if they saw something in him and they see something in him, then they very, very likely are seeing something I'm not. So, you know, I would trust them more than I would trust me. So, you know, I think I'd probably hold on to it, though I wouldn't be seeking it at all. The next one, number 11 pick in the draft, James Bouknight. His hoop silver is going for $2. Wow. His Donruss orange laser is going for $1.50, and then his origin space is going for $4. So he's averaging 4.6 points per game, 1.7 rebound on just 40.8% field goal and 34.7% three-point in 9.8 minutes per game only, which is the lowest of anybody on this list. And he's also only played in 31 games. Now, so his cards are maybe the cheapest, or the second cheapest maybe, of anybody on this list. And, you know, for good reason. I mean, those stats are really underwhelming. He was drafted as somebody to be an offensive spark, and he is not playing offense well, and that's what he does. So, you know, he's the kind of player, you know, he did come into the league with a bit of hype. I mean, there was some expectations that he was going to really be something special. You know, even the fact that he went all the way back to the pick 11, a lot of people were thinking he could go earlier. So that being said, you know, maybe he just needs, it's a common thing that players' expectations are too high too early. Some players need time to develop, and he could possibly be that kind of player. Right now, his shooting is really pretty terrible, but he's only played, like I was saying, 31 games, so we don't really have enough of the sample size. So his cards are bottom rung, like, you know, no name second round player, kind of like the kind of guy who's not going to be in the league for more than a couple of years. His values are at that level. So, you know, there's very little risk to considering the possibility of buying him because of his offensive speciality. If he did have a block of time where he broke out, which he has a lot of potential to do that at the minimum, and if he had a block of time where he broke out, his cards could see quick spikes. I don't think they're the kind of spikes that would stay long term, but they could see quick spikes. So he's somebody I would really keep an eye on, you know, and consider getting some of these short printed cards if you can find them for incredibly cheap. I mean, the fact that you can buy a hoop silver out of $199 for $2, I don't see how that can go down. It's already so low. So I'd be keeping an eye on him, even though he hasn't done well yet. Next up, we have the number 10 pick in the draft, Ziaire Williams. Now his hoop silver, there's only one comp I could find, which was from February, and it was $1. His Donruss orange laser is $1.50, and his origins base was $2.50. So he's been averaging 8.1 points per game, 2.1 rebounds per game on 54% shooting, 31.4 from three, and 21.7 minutes per game for a team that's a championship contender. That's not actually that bad, considering, you know, people were really surprised, like, why did Memphis jump up in the draft and then draft this guy that nobody expected anything of? He's done okay. You know, I think he's been a solid role player for an excellent team. So, you know, I think he's on the right situation, I think, which is really good for him. You know, because they've got a lot of players that they're really developing and that have developed excellently. I mean, you know, they went from Ja Morant, who's taken big jumps. They got Desmond Bane, who's taken big jumps, and now they got Ziaire Williams in the mix. So I think he's in a good situation. And his cards are ridiculously low. I don't think he's ever going to be somebody who's amazing, whose cards become super valuable. You know, you can even see other players on his team, like Jaren Jackson Jr. is way better than him, and his cards have never jumped up. It's just keep going down. I talk about Jaren Jackson Jr. I think it's because I bought a lot of his cards expecting him to go up at some point, and he just keeps going down. Ziaire Williams, I have a feeling, will forever be a little bit in the background, even though I think he's going to be a very solid role player kind of player for a good, solid career. I'm not high on finding his cards, but that being said, his cards, just like James Bouknight in some ways, his cards are so low that it's hard to say that they'd be a bad buy when they're that cheap. They got to go up a little bit once people realize, oh, no, he's pretty good. They didn't completely miss the boat, you know, like drafting him so early. They could have gotten somebody perhaps better, but he wasn't a terrible pick. All right, number 9 pick in the draft, Davion Mitchell. His hoop silver is going for $13.50. His orange laser is going for $4, and his origins base is going for $2.50. He averaged 11.5 points per game and 4.2 assists per game, with 47.7% field goal, 31.6% three-point, and 27.7 minutes per game. And he's a defensive nightmare. He's a defensive specialist. So, his card's value is similar to Joshua Primo, surprisingly, a little bit higher than some of the others, although quite a bit lower than Ayo Dosunmu. The more I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, wow, Ayo Dosunmu might really be overpriced, and even Herbert Jones might be a little bit overpriced. Maybe the surprise factor of those guys really stood them out a little bit. But Davion Mitchell's prices are not bad. I don't know. With him being on the Sacramento Kings, it's not a good team to be on for the hobby. And for him being a defensive-minded specialist, that's also not very good for the hobby, from a hobby perspective. I think he's a great player. I really like him. He's been undersized for what he does, but for somebody that tiny who can guard, even maybe your best wing and really hold them back, he's a good player. I really do like him. If I don't think I'd be seeking out his cards because I don't think the hobby's going to be, really getting a whole lot on him. But if I did get some of his cards, I do think I'd hold on to them for a little while and see if he has some spikes, if he has some more appreciation, if people in a general sense recognize how good he really is at some point. But he's not the kind of player that's going to get a lot of the hobby love. So I'll just leave it at that. Number 8, Franz Wagner. So his hoop silver is going for about $21.50. His orange laser was only $3, which seems underpriced compared to his other prices here, and $8.50 for his Origins base rookie. So he averaged 15.2 points per game, 4.5 rebounds per game, 2.9 assists per game, 51.7% field goal, 35.4% three-point on 30.7 minutes per game, and he started all 79 games of the games he played. So his cards value are justifiably a bit higher than most others on this list. It's maybe second highest after Ayo Dosunmu, I think, and justifiably so. I think out of everybody on this list that we've mentioned so far, he had the best season. I mean, there was even some talk for him in the Rookie of the Year kind of conversation for a period of time there. I mean, I don't think he would have been up there with the 3 guys who were really the finalist choices, but he was maybe the next one, the 4th one, and he did really well. It's kind of hard to tell what he's going to be long term because of the team he's on. I mean, being on the Orlando Magic and getting so much focus because they just don't have that many guys. I mean, it's the reason Cole Anthony really broke out for a period of time, and Franz Wagner had such an amazing season. Part of it is because there's nobody else for them to go to. I mean, those are they have to go to those guys because they don't have a lot of other guys to go to. But I think he's a really good player, and his cards, in comparison to, I wouldn't compare him. I think he has more potential to have a higher upside than anybody else we've mentioned. I would want to compare him more to the names we're going to look at next, and compared to them, I think his cards are a little undervalued sometimes, and his cards are sometimes falling through the cracks as well. I think sometimes people see him and they're like, oh yeah, he's got a lot of potential, so his card values are can go up high sometimes, but I don't think it's everybody who thinks that way. So sometimes his auctions, for example, because there's not a huge amount of people who are seeing him that way, sometimes his auctions can really slip through the cracks. So I think occasionally he's a good one to at least keep an eye on. And if nothing else, if you're not going to try to invest, I would at least go in and bid lower level on a bunch of auctions and just see if any of those auctions happen to fall through the cracks. That's probably what I would do with him. All right, next up, number 7. Now we're getting more and more into the interesting stuff. This is number 7, Jonathan Kuminga. So his hoop silver is going for $140. His orange laser is going for $13, and his Origins base is going for $22. So way higher than anybody we've looked at by a significant portion. His stats this year, 9.3 points per game, 3.3 rebounds per game on 56.7% field goal percentage, 33.6% three-point percentage, and 16.9 minutes per game. So if you just look at the stats and then you look at the numbers, it feels a little like way off balance. Like, whoa, like why is he so much higher? His stats look worse than most people. He's getting less minutes per game than most people. Now, there is some justifiable said than that. I think Jonathan Kuminga has more hype behind his name than any of the other names we've mentioned so far. Part of it is he's actually an important part of the Warriors. The Warriors are the darling of the NBA for so many, for good reason. I mean, Steph Curry's awesome. Klay Thompson's awesome. Now they got Jordan Poole. It's a really fun team to watch. You can't dislike those guys. But I think there's a lot of hype behind his name, and I see a lot of potential. Definitely, he came into the league as a raw prospect, and he's shown that he has a really extremely high upside. He's also explosively athletic, so he's the kind of player who could really catch waves in the hobby. He could be loved by the hobby. You could see that he's that kind of player. He's going to be on highlight reels. He's going to be somebody who's in the conversation if he continues to improve. But so far, I think he's overvalued a bit. I think he is good and he's got good potential. His shooting percentage is really good, but part of that is because he doesn't really shoot. He just he digs to the hoop, and tries to dunk it every time. Which he can do that. So good on him. I can't do that. I was always back at the 3-point line, waiting there, or seeing if I could get a shot from the corner of the key if I was lucky. But yeah, I feel like he's way overvalued. When I was looking at his prices, I was really surprised how high they are in comparison to everyone else on this list, even in comparison to the guys who it should be highest. Kuminga maybe had the highest card values on the entire list, higher than Cade Cunningham, higher than Scottie Barnes, higher than Evan Mobley. That was crazy to me, because even if he has that high upside, I don't see him being as good as one of those three guys. So personally, if I had a low numbered or high valued card of Jonathan Kuminga, I would be selling it right now. If I pulled something from the pack that was valuable, I'd sell it right away. I feel like his card's value is really high, and I don't think it's sustainable. That's just my thought. Number 6, Josh Giddey. So his Hoop Silver's going for about $77. His Donruss Orange Lasers, $9.50, and then his Origins base was out of proportion at $45. So this one, he's averaging 12.5 points per game, 7.8 rebounds per game, 6.4 assists per game, 46.1% field goal, 26.3% three, played 31.5 minutes per game. So Josh Giddey's an interesting one to analyze. You look at those stats; they're really fascinating. I mean, he's pretty close to averaging a triple-double. I mean, not that close to, but for a rookie, that's pretty solid. And I think he got the youngest. He's the youngest player to ever get a triple-double in NBA history, which is saying something. So he's got potential, certainly, and he's a good player. But I think the fact that he has such a massive role on a team that's not that good, the main guy, of course, for the Thunder is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but Josh Giddey has a lot of space to really develop and to shine, and I think he's gonna be good. But I think he's been overhyped by the hobby right from early on. I think people were surprised when he was drafted this high, but then once he started playing really well and getting high numbers, then the hype machine kind of started to follow him a little bit. So he's the kind of player I'm not high on, to be honest. I think he could be good, but I think his cards are already overvalued, and I don't see how they could really go that much higher. And once the Thunder starts to become a better team, he's also going to have a smaller role, I think, over time. So he's a good player. Nothing against the guy. I'm not aiming for him. I think he's overvalued. Number 5, we've got Jalen Suggs. His Hoop Silver's worth $27.50. His Orange Laser Donruss is $2.50, and his Origins base is $3. He averaged 11.8 points per game, 4.4 assists, 3.6 rebounds, on 40% field goal and 21.4% three-point and 27.2 minutes per game. So Jalen Suggs is an interesting one. He had a very underwhelming rookie season, but you saw some signs that he might be able to figure it out later. His shooting percentage there, you looked at that, was extremely low. 40% field goal and 21.4% three-point shooting is not going to cut it. But, he has shown signs that he will be somebody who has the potential to do more. So I see, maybe I could say something similar with him and James Bouknight, where I could see him having a spike at some point. And the fact that his cards are so low, he was kind of consensus, he was thought of as being one of his top 4 picks. Like when the draft came, there was 4 guys that didn't include Scottie Barnes that were thought of like the guys who were going to be the main people in this draft. And Jalen Suggs just didn't have a good rookie season. Because of that, his card value has come down quite a bit. So he's the kind of player that some of them are going through the cracks, and sometimes because he was picked so high and had a lot of early hype, sometimes the prices can still be high. I think he's a great person to look to find some of the really low price stuff, not to hold on to long term, but to think that there's a strong possibility for a sudden spike at some point if he has a breakout couple of weeks. Then I'd sell quickly, because I think he's done so bad that once he does do well and people will remember that really early hype, I think his cards could have some spikes. So that's what I'm thinking of with him. Number 4, Scottie Barnes, Rookie of the Year. So his Hoop Silver is $80, his Donruss Orange Laser is $29, and his Origins base is $32. So he averaged 15.3 points per game, 7.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 1.1 steal, 52.4% field goal, 30.1% 3-point on 35.4 minutes per game. Wow, he's playing a lot of minutes per game. Scottie Barnes, you can't say anything negative about this guy. He's got the work ethic, he's got the skill. People thought he was going to be a development kind of player, and he just came in as a veteran. I mean, he's great. I really like him. I think the hobby also generally likes him. I don't know. He's a tough one to say because I think he's going to be an excellent player in the league long term, but his values are already relatively high. He doesn't have the kind of like hype spark behind him like Josh Giddey and Jonathan Kuminga. So actually his prices are lower than them, which is crazy to me because he's a better player and he's just great. But that being said, the nature of his play isn't something that's going to get a ton of hobby love long term, I don't think. He's one of those guys that's just, he can carry a workload and he can push forward. I mean, 35.4 minutes per game, he's pushing in there and he's doing great. And he's going to be a great player, but his cards are already pretty high, and he won the Rookie of the Year, so of course he's not under the radar at all. None of his cards are kind of falling through the cracks. So I don't know, I feel like maybe he's not somebody if I pull a card of his, I'm not necessarily going to try to sell it immediately, but I'm not necessarily seeking out his cards because I think there's enough people who are already doing that his values are a bit high in comparison to what they might be later, but I could see why you might want to aim for him still. He's just a good player, so his floor is so high. His ceiling I don't think is super high compared to, I think Mobley and Cunningham actually have higher ceilings, but maybe there's nobody who has a higher floor than Barnes. He's just already excellent, and I think he will be. Different story with Evan Mobley. Evan Mobley, Hoop Silver's going for $100, a little more than Barnes. His Orange Laser is 18, a little less than Barnes, and his Origins is 20, less than Barnes also. So generally his cards are going less than Barnes overall, though that Hoops one was going for more. He averaged 15 points per game, 8.3 rebounds per game, 1.7 blocks, 52.2% field goal on 33.8 minutes per game. I really like the long-term future of Mobley. I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know why I think of him in the hobby a little bit more highly than I think of Barnes. I'm not exactly sure why when I really analyze it. I think he's just the kind of player. I mean, he's going to be a defensive player of the year kind of guy. He could be the core player on a team. I think the main guy. I think in a little bit. I think a Kevin Garnett or something. I don't know. I see him as being somebody who could take some spikes later, and he's somebody who he falls through the cracks a little bit more than Barnes. I find, at least when I look at his comps, it seems like every once in a while one of his cards will go so high. It's like, well, okay, let's step back from that one. But there's other cards that you can see here, even with the Orange Laser being $18 compared to Barnes $29. That feels a bit of a falling through the cracks. Whereas Origins is 20 compared to Barnes 32. That also feels like a bit of a falling through the cracks. So he's somebody I would keep an eye on as a potential person to look for. I just have a lot of faith in this guy. I just think he's going to be really excellent. All right, number 2, Jalen Green. His Hoop Silver's going for $61. His Donruss Orange Laser's $11, and his Origins base rookie's $22. So he averaged 17.3 points per game, second highest among all rookies, 3.4 rebounds, 2.6 assists, 50.8% field goal, which I was surprised was that high, 34.3% 3-point, and 31.2 minutes per game. So Jalen Green's a really interesting one to think about, actually. Now, his his early part of the season was really terrible. And I think a lot of people, when they look at Jalen Green, they think he had a bad rookie season because he had a bad first half of the season. But his second half of the season, if you just look at the second half of the season among the rookies, I think would have been in the Rookie of the Year conversation. He did really excellently. He figured out a lot of his stuff. His shot selection was terrible early on, and it got much better. And you can see that by his percentage.
All right, so sorry, I just got a phone call, so I kind of lost my train of thought. I was talking about Jalen Green. I don't remember what I was talking about, but what I was saying was I actually think he is going to be an excellent player in the hobby. I think he has shown, his ceiling is very high, and his expectations became very low because of his bad start. So I think his card value, though it doesn't always fall through the cracks, and sometimes, there's people who see his potential really high. So sometimes his cards will be in the same tier as Scottie Barnes and Evan Mobley and Cade Cunningham, but very frequently it falls at a lower price tier. And I think he's gonna have some spikes, and I think he's gonna be somebody who's gonna be really loved by the hobby. So I actually really like finding his cards if I can find some of those ones that are falling through the cracks. I mean, the fact that his Donruss Orange Laser, though, I don't particularly like the Donruss Orange Laser. I'm not going after that one, but the fact that it's 3 times cheaper than Scottie Barnes feels undervalued. Again, not all of his cards fall through the cracks, but some do. So I think he's worth keeping an eye on. And number 1, Cade Cunningham. So his Hoop Silver is going for $103. His Donruss Orange Laser is $25, and his Origins Base is $51. His stats were 17.4 points per game, 5.6 assists per game, 5.5 rebounds per game, 47.1% field goal, 31.4% three-point, and 32.6 minutes per game. So his values are very high, his stats are very good. So all around, I think he's a great player. His price is pretty high, but I do think out of anybody in this draft, he has the potential to be the guy. If each draft kind of ends up having like one main dude, you kind of have Luka Doncic from that year, you kind of have Ja Morant now at this point outpacing Zion Williamson, kind of have. Sometimes you have 2. I mean, LaMelo and Anthony Edwards both kind of from that draft. So you usually have 1 or 2 from each draft who kind of seem to be that spark and that one that kind of ends up standing out above others over time. And Cade Cunningham, more than anyone else, seems to me to be the potential person to be that. He came out at the beginning part of his season was not so good. He faced some injuries. He was underwhelming. His expectations were so incredibly high. I mean, everybody knew he was going to be the number 1 draft pick, despite the fact that Mobley would have been the number 1 draft pick in many other drafts, and Jalen Green would have been the number 1 draft pick in many other drafts, and even Jalen Suggs probably would have been the number 1 draft pick in some other drafts. But Cade Cunningham was so far above them in the expectations right from the get-go that I think the fact that he didn't do that well early on brought him down to earth. But then you can just see, looking at his stats, I mean, he was the leading scorer among all rookies, and getting more than 5 rebounds and 5 assists per game also as a rookie. And he has this ability to control the pace of the game, kind of like Luka Doncic does. He's a great player. I think he has the highest potential to be the guy from this draft. The fact that his cards are hovering around a similar spot to Scottie Barnes and Evan Mobley, there's justification for that. But I think he's got the highest ceiling of anybody. So he's somebody I think he's also got the highest potential for having a massive hype train back him up more than anybody. So I could see him having massive spikes at some point down the road. So I'm looking for his cards whenever I can. Mobley, I'm also looking for. Barnes, I'm also looking for if I can find good deals. Get Jalen Green, I'm looking for a little bit more actively. If I can find some really things falling through the cracks from James Bouknight, I might keep an eye, because if I can get some for $1, I might keep an eye. Then the other guys, I'm not going after too much. So that's just a summary of where I'm at. Just my thinking. I could be wrong about all of this, so please do your own research about things and watch game tape and figure out, you know, what you think, where you think things are going to go. And like I've said in other videos, you know, you got to be careful about rookie hype. It's, you know, it's not necessarily the best place to make your investments, but at the same time, it's one of the funnest places to place some of your energy, because it's just fun watching the young guys kind of break out into the league. And I think that's part of the reason why rookies, you know, their cards are overvalued so often so early, because it's fun to watch them. And so, you know, I think that's mostly what this video was meant to be, kind of just a way to reflect on where they're at, not to encourage rookie prospecting as the main way to go, but to have a video about rookie prospecting, because it's a lot of fun. I'm going to make another video in the future about rookie prospecting in baseball too, because I've been doing that this year for the first time really ever, and I've been quite enjoying it. And I think it's a different scenario in baseball, and I've just, as I'm doing more of it and learning more of it, I thought it would be fun to make a video about that. So that's going to be coming up in the near future. Otherwise, hope all is going well. That's all for this video. Deuces. Peace. Bye.